The people who laugh at you today are often the same people who will stand and applaud you tomorrow. The grand ballroom of the Lakeshore Regency Hotel glowed beneath hundreds of crystal lights as graduates from one of Chicago's most prestigious high schools gathered to celebrate their 25th class reunion. Laughter echoed across the room. Old friendships were renewed. Business cards exchanged hands. Stories of success floated through the air as effortlessly as the music playing from the string quartet near the stage. For many attendees, the evening represented more than nostalgia. It was an opportunity to display what they had become. Luxury watches, designer gowns, successful careers, and carefully curated accomplishments filled nearly every conversation. Near the entrance, a sleek black luxury sedan pulled to a stop beneath the hotel's covered driveway. A valet quickly opened the door. Preston Mercer stepped out first. At 45 years old, he had become one of the most successful technology investors in the country. Financial magazines regularly featured his name. Industry conferences paid enormous fees to hear him speak. To many former classmates, he embodied the American dream. Success followed him everywhere. Standing beside him was his wife, Danica Holloway. Her elegant navy dress was understated compared to the glittering fashion visible inside the ballroom. She wore no extravagant jewelry, no flashy designer labels. Her appearance reflected confidence rather than performance. Yet Preston barely seemed to notice. As they approached the entrance, he glanced toward the crowd gathering inside and smiled to himself. "This should be interesting," he said. Danica looked at him with curiosity. "Why?" Preston adjusted his jacket. "You will see. Everyone from our class is here. Lawyers, executives, celebrities, entrepreneurs. It is quite a room." Danica smiled softly. "I'm looking forward to meeting them." Preston laughed lightly. "Just do not be surprised if the conversations get competitive." His tone carried a hint of amusement that Danica quietly recognized. Over the years, she had learned how to hear the things people did not say aloud. The comment was not really about the reunion. It was about expectations. Preston assumed she would feel out of place among people obsessed with status and achievement. What he did not realize was that Danica had spent most of her adult life walking into rooms where nobody knew who she was. It had never bothered her before. Inside the ballroom, guests greeted Preston enthusiastically almost the moment he entered. Several former classmates rushed over to shake his hand. Others congratulated him on recent business ventures. Danica stood beside him politely, offering warm smiles as introductions were made. Yet she quickly noticed something interesting. Many people seemed far more interested in Preston's accomplishments than in knowing anything about her. Some barely acknowledged her presence. Others offered polite greetings before immediately redirecting their attention back to Preston. Danica did not take offense. She simply observed. Across the room, conversation slowed as more guests recognized the billionaire investor who had just arrived. A few people whispered while glancing toward his wife. Curiosity filled their expressions. Some appeared surprised. Others seemed confused. One woman in particular watched from across the ballroom with unusual interest. Vanessa Cole, a former classmate whose reputation for social influence had followed her long after graduation. She studied Danica carefully before leaning toward a nearby friend and quietly saying something that caused both women to laugh. Danica never heard the words, but she saw the reaction. She simply smiled and continued walking beside her husband. What nobody in that ballroom understood was that the woman they were beginning to underestimate had already achieved something far more meaningful than many of them could imagine. And before the night was over, the room that judged her first would become the same room forced to see her very differently. The deeper Danica and Preston moved into the reunion, the more the evening began revealing its true character. What had started as a celebration of shared memories gradually transformed into an unspoken competition. Conversations revolved around promotions, company acquisitions, luxury homes, private investments, and social influence. Every introduction seemed to include a title. Every story carried a subtle reminder of status. Danica listened politely while moving through small groups of former classmates. She asked questions, remembered names, and showed genuine interest in people's lives. Yet few offered the same curiosity in return. Most assumed that if she had accomplished anything remarkable, Preston would have mentioned it already. Instead, they viewed her through the lens of his success. Near one of the ballroom's grand windows overlooking Lake Michigan, Vanessa Cole gathered several former classmates around a cocktail table. Laughter drifted through the group as stories from high school resurfaced. When Preston and Danica approached, Vanessa greeted them with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Preston Mercer," she said warmly. "Still the star of every room you walk into." Several guests laughed. Preston smiled and accepted the compliment comfortably. Vanessa then turned toward Danica. "And you must be Danica." Her tone remained pleasant, but there was something calculating beneath it. "We have heard so much about Preston over the years." Danica smiled. "It is nice to finally meet everyone." Vanessa nodded. "So what do you do?" The question sounded innocent, yet the way the surrounding group suddenly quieted suggested otherwise. Danica answered simply, "I work in education and community development." Vanessa blinked. "Education? Yes. That sounds rewarding." The word rewarding carried the kind of polite sympathy usually reserved for people assumed to earn far less than everyone else in the room. Several guests exchanged knowing smiles. One man immediately began discussing venture capital investments. Another mentioned his law firm. A woman nearby spoke proudly about her media company. The conversation quickly shifted toward financial success. Danica remained silent, allowing others to speak. To her, there was nothing unusual about listening. But to the people around her, silence became proof of assumption. They interpreted humility as a lack of achievement. Across the room, Preston observed the interaction with quiet amusement. He noticed how naturally Danica faded into the background among such ambitious personalities. Part of him expected her to feel uncomfortable. Another part almost welcomed it. For years, he had built his identity around visible success. Somewhere along the way, he had begun measuring value using the same standards as the people surrounding him tonight. Vanessa leaned forward. "You know, our class turned out surprisingly accomplished. It is incredible seeing where everyone ended up." Her eyes drifted toward Danica. "Some stories are certainly bigger than others." The remark drew soft laughter from several guests. Danica heard it. So did Preston. Yet neither responded. Danica simply offered a calm smile and looked toward the stage where event organizers were making final preparations for the evening's awards presentation. Something about the setup caught her attention. Large screens had been installed beside the podium. Several administrators reviewed notes near the front row. Meanwhile, behind her, the assumptions continued multiplying. What nobody realized was that every judgment being formed in that ballroom rested on incomplete information. The room believed it understood Danica Holloway. The truth was that not a single person there had even begun to understand the scope of the life she had quietly built. As the evening progressed, the reunion settled into a predictable rhythm. Small groups formed and reformed around the ballroom, each conversation orbiting around success, recognition, and achievement. Former classmates compared career milestones, shared stories about business ventures, and celebrated accomplishments accumulated over the past 25 years. Yet beneath the surface, another pattern had emerged. More and more people seemed interested in learning about Danica, though not for the reasons she would have preferred. Curiosity mixed with assumption. They wanted to understand how the quiet woman beside Preston Mercer fit into a room filled with people eager to showcase their accomplishments. Unfortunately, many of their questions were not designed to discover who she truly was. They were designed to measure her. Near one of the reception areas, a group of former classmates invited Danica into their conversation. At first, the exchange seemed friendly. A physician discussed healthcare innovations. A corporate attorney described a recent merger. An entrepreneur spoke about expanding into international markets. Then the attention shifted toward Danica. "So how long have you been working in education?" one woman asked. "Many years," Danica replied warmly. "That must be very fulfilling," another guest said. "It is." A man holding a glass of sparkling water smiled politely. "Do you manage a school?" Danica shook her head. "Not exactly." "Then what kind of community development do you do?" someone else asked. Danica considered the question. "Mostly programs that help create opportunities for students and families." The answer was truthful, yet intentionally simple. She had never enjoyed talking about herself. The room grew quiet for a moment. Several people seemed to expect a more impressive explanation. When one failed to arrive, assumptions immediately rushed in to fill the space. Vanessa appeared beside the group as though she had been waiting for the opportunity. "That sounds wonderful," she said. "It is refreshing to meet someone focused on helping others instead of chasing money all the time." Her smile suggested generosity, but the hidden message was impossible to miss. Several guests laughed politely. Others exchanged glances. Danica simply smiled. "Opportunity changes lives," she said. Vanessa nodded. "Of course, although I imagine it is difficult to compete with some of the careers represented in this room." The statement drew another round of soft laughter. This time, even Preston smiled slightly. The reaction was brief, almost unconscious, but Danica noticed it immediately. She did not feel anger. She felt disappointment. Throughout their marriage, she had never expected Preston to boast about her accomplishments. She preferred privacy, but seeing him quietly participate in the assumptions surrounding her created a distance she had not fully recognized before. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, event organizers continued preparing for the evening's final ceremony. Technicians adjusted lighting around the stage. Large projection screens displayed photographs from the graduating class over the years. Few guests paid attention. Most remained focused on socializing. Danica happened to glance toward the stage once again. Something about the preparations seemed more elaborate than a typical reunion program. A series of videos appeared to be cued for presentation. Several school administrators reviewed notes with unusual care. Whatever was coming appeared significant. Back in the crowd, the questions continued. People asked about income, professional titles, and organizational influence without asking directly. Every conversation felt like an evaluation disguised as friendliness. Yet Danica answered each question with patience and grace. The more others underestimated her, the calmer she became. What she understood, and what nobody else in that ballroom yet realized, was that true significance rarely announces itself. Sometimes it waits quietly while others reveal exactly who they are. The evening should have been bringing people closer together. Instead, it was slowly revealing the distance between appearance and character. As the reunion continued, more guests gathered near the center of the ballroom, where a series of networking conversations had formed around several prominent alumni. Preston stood comfortably among them. His reputation guaranteed attention wherever he went. People asked for advice. Investors sought introductions. Former classmates shared stories about following his career over the years. For Preston, the admiration felt familiar. For Danica, it offered another opportunity to observe. She noticed how easily people confused visibility with value. Across the room, Vanessa seemed determined to keep herself at the center of attention. She moved effortlessly between conversations, making introductions and sharing opinions as though she were unofficially hosting the event. Whenever Danica entered a discussion, Vanessa somehow found a way to redirect it. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Near the dessert display, a group of guests gathered around a table discussing philanthropy. One former classmate proudly described donating to a university scholarship fund. Another spoke about supporting local arts programs. Danica listened with genuine interest. Community investment had always mattered deeply to her. Then Vanessa joined the group, carrying a glass of sparkling water. "We were just talking about giving back," she said. "Everyone here seems to have a cause these days." She smiled toward Danica. "What about you? Do you volunteer somewhere?" The question sounded innocent enough. Several guests turned toward Danica expectantly. "I spend most of my time working with educational programs," Danica answered. Vanessa nodded. "That is very admirable." The word admirable landed with the same subtle condescension that had followed Danica throughout the evening. Before Danica could say more, Vanessa continued. "You know, not everyone measures success by money. Some people are happy simply helping others while their spouses build empires." A few guests laughed softly. Others looked uncomfortable. The remark had crossed a line, though it remained disguised as humor. Danica remained composed. "Helping others build opportunities is important work," she replied. Vanessa smiled. "Of course it is." Then she turned toward Preston. "You must be very proud. It takes confidence to support a partner whose ambitions are so different from your own." Several people looked toward Preston, waiting for his response. It was a simple moment. A husband could have ended the conversation with a single sentence. He could have acknowledged his wife's accomplishments. He could have corrected the assumptions filling the room. Instead, Preston chuckled lightly. Danica has always preferred staying out of the spotlight. The answer was not cruel, yet it carried a consequence he failed to recognize. His silence allowed every false assumption to survive. Vanessa immediately interpreted it as confirmation. So did everyone else. Danica felt the disappointment settle quietly inside her. Not because strangers underestimated her. She had experienced that many times before. What hurt was realizing that the person who knew her best seemed unwilling to remind others who she truly was. For a brief moment, she looked across the ballroom toward the stage. Event staff were now gathering near the podium. Several administrators appeared unusually focused. Large screens displayed the reunion logo before fading to black. Something significant was clearly approaching, yet nobody seemed aware of it. Around her, conversations continued. Assumptions multiplied. Judgments hardened. Vanessa enjoyed the attention she had created. Preston remained unaware of the growing distance his choices were creating. And Danica stood quietly among them all, carrying a truth so much larger than the room's opinions that soon nobody would be able to ignore it. For most of the guests attending the reunion, success was something displayed. It appeared in job titles, luxury cars, magazine features, and carefully crafted introductions. Danica had spent her entire adult life seeing success differently. As conversations continued around her, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this ballroom. Years earlier, while many people were chasing recognition, she had been sitting in crowded school libraries, community centers, and church basements listening to families describe challenges that rarely attracted headlines. She remembered students sharing dreams that seemed impossible because nobody had ever invested in them. She remembered parents working multiple jobs while trying to create better futures for their children. Those conversations had changed her life. Instead of building a career focused on personal visibility, she had dedicated herself to building opportunities for others. The result was an educational foundation that quietly expanded from one neighborhood program into a national network supporting schools, scholarships, mentorship initiatives, and leadership development projects across the country. Yet very few people knew her name. That had never been the goal. Back in the ballroom, Danica stood near one of the large windows overlooking the city lights. The view reminded her how many lives were unfolding beyond the walls of the hotel. While guests compared achievements, thousands of students were studying in learning centers funded through programs she had helped create. Hundreds of teachers were leading classrooms supported by grants her organization provided. Entire communities had benefited from projects developed over more than a decade of careful work. None of that required applause to matter. Nearby, Preston was laughing with several former classmates. Danica watched him for a moment. There had been a time when he understood this part of her completely. In the early years of their marriage, he admired her commitment to helping others. He often described her compassion as one of the qualities he loved most. Somewhere between business success and public recognition, however, their perspectives had slowly drifted apart. Preston had become increasingly focused on achievements that could be measured and displayed. Danica remained focused on impact that could be felt but not always seen. Neither path was wrong. Yet the distance between them had grown larger than either realized. Across the room, Vanessa continued moving confidently through conversations. She seemed energized by the attention she attracted. Each interaction reinforced the assumptions already forming throughout the evening. To Vanessa, Danica represented someone ordinary standing beside someone extraordinary. The irony was almost impossible to measure. Suddenly, subtle movement near the stage caught Danica's attention again. Several school administrators gathered alongside event coordinators. A production team checked audio equipment. Technicians reviewed presentations displayed briefly on backstage monitors before quickly switching screens. The preparations seemed increasingly important. Even some guests had begun noticing. Conversations gradually shifted toward speculation about the evening's final program. Rumors circulated about a special recognition planned by the Alumni Association. Nobody seemed certain what would happen. As curiosity spread through the ballroom, Danica remained calm. She had attended simply to support her husband. Recognition was the last thing on her mind. Yet fate often moves quietly before revealing itself. Around her, assumptions continued building higher and higher. Judgments hardened. Expectations settled into place. And with every passing minute, the difference between what people believed about Danica Holloway and the truth of who she really was grew impossible to ignore. The atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted almost imperceptibly as the evening approached its final program. Conversations that had dominated the night gradually softened. Guests began moving toward their assigned tables. Waitstaff cleared remaining dessert plates while technicians performed final checks around the stage. The large projection screens that had displayed reunion photographs throughout the evening now rested on a single elegant image bearing the Alumni Association crest. Anticipation spread across the room. Even those who had spent most of the night discussing business deals and professional achievements seemed curious about what was coming next. Near the front of the ballroom, school administrators quietly took their seats. Several distinguished alumni who served on the association board gathered near the stage entrance. Their presence suggested that whatever announcement was planned carried unusual significance. Danica noticed the activity but thought little of it. She remained focused on enjoying the evening. Across the room, Vanessa continued entertaining a group of former classmates with stories and observations. Her confidence appeared stronger than ever. After all, the social hierarchy of the reunion seemed firmly established. Preston remained one of the evening's most celebrated guests. Vanessa remained one of its most visible personalities. Danica remained, in their eyes, a pleasant but unremarkable presence. Then the lights dimmed slightly. A gentle chime echoed through the ballroom. Conversations immediately quieted. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage and smiled warmly at the audience. Good evening, everyone. Before we conclude tonight's celebration, we have one final tradition that has become increasingly meaningful to our alumni community. Guests settled into attentive silence. The host continued. Every 5 years, the Alumni Association selects one graduate whose impact has extended far beyond personal success. This recognition is reserved for an individual whose work has transformed lives, strengthened communities, and reflected the values our school hopes to inspire. Several people nodded with interest. Others exchanged curious glances. Preston listened casually. Vanessa appeared intrigued. Danica simply watched. The host smiled again. This year's selection process was one of the most competitive in our history. Our committee reviewed nominations from across the country. We examined business achievements, public service, philanthropy, innovation, and community leadership. A large screen behind the stage illuminated with images of past recipients. Applause followed each photograph. The room's excitement continued building. Tonight, the host said, we are honored to present the most influential graduate award. The words immediately captured everyone's attention. Guests leaned forward in their chairs. Conversations ceased entirely. This was clearly the evening's highest honor. Around the ballroom, speculation spread through silent glances. Several attendees looked toward Preston. Others considered successful entrepreneurs and public figures seated throughout the room. Vanessa smiled confidently as though anticipating an exciting reveal. Meanwhile, event staff moved discreetly into position near the stage. School officials exchanged prepared notes. A production team signaled from the control booth. Everything had been carefully planned. The host glanced toward the audience and paused deliberately, allowing anticipation to grow. The recipient of this year's award, he said, has dedicated years of service to creating opportunities for others. Millions of lives have been touched by the programs, scholarships, and educational initiatives associated with this individual's work. Danica felt a strange sense of recognition as she listened. Not expectation, simply familiarity. Around her, nobody noticed. The room remained focused on guessing the winner. Yet within moments, the assumptions guiding the entire evening were about to collide with a truth so unexpected that the reunion would never be remembered the same way again. The ballroom remained completely silent as the master of ceremonies paused before announcing the recipient. Anticipation filled every corner of the room. Guests sat forward in their chairs. Former classmates exchanged curious glances. Several people looked toward Preston, assuming that a man whose business success had earned national attention would naturally be among the leading candidates. Others quietly speculated about entrepreneurs, public officials, and executives seated throughout the audience. No one considered the woman sitting quietly beside Preston. The host smiled as the large screens behind him illuminated once more. The recipient of this year's most influential graduate award has spent more than a decade transforming educational opportunities for students across the United States, he said. Images began appearing on the screens. Classrooms, community centers, scholarship recipients, teachers and students gathered at graduation ceremonies. The audience watched attentively. Many assumed they were seeing the accomplishments of some nationally recognized philanthropist. The host continued, "This individual has helped establish scholarship programs serving thousands of students, funded educational initiatives in underserved communities, and created partnerships that continue changing lives every day." A ripple of admiration moved through the crowd. The achievements were extraordinary. Vanessa crossed her arms and watched with interest. Preston nodded respectfully. Whoever the recipient was, the accomplishments deserved recognition. Then the screen faded briefly to black. The room became even quieter. A single spotlight illuminated the stage. The host looked toward the audience and smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating this year's recipient, Danica Holloway." For a moment, nobody moved. The name seemed to hang suspended in the air. Several guests blinked in confusion. Others looked around as though expecting another Danica Holloway to stand somewhere else in the ballroom. Then all eyes turned toward the same person. Danica remained seated, her expression reflecting genuine surprise. She had known about the nomination process years earlier, but had never expected to be selected. Across the room, Vanessa stared at her in complete disbelief. The confident smile that had followed her throughout the evening vanished instantly. Around her, former classmates exchanged stunned looks. The woman they had quietly dismissed all night had just been announced as the most influential graduate in their entire class. Preston sat motionless. He looked at Danica as though seeing her clearly for the first time in years. The room erupted into applause. At first it came from school administrators and alumni board members who already knew the outcome. Then the applause spread throughout the ballroom as guests processed what had just happened. Many rose to their feet. Others joined moments later. Before long, nearly the entire room was standing. Danica slowly rose from her chair. The standing ovation continued growing stronger. People who had ignored her earlier were now applauding with genuine admiration. People who had questioned her accomplishments suddenly realized how little they actually knew. Vanessa remained frozen. Every assumption she had made throughout the evening now felt painfully exposed. The spotlight followed Danica as she began walking toward the stage. Yet she carried herself exactly as she had all night. Calm, graceful, humble. There was no trace of triumph in her expression. No desire to embarrass anyone. No satisfaction in watching perceptions collapse. Her dignity remained unchanged because it had never depended on recognition. As she reached the stairs leading to the stage, the screens behind the podium illuminated once again. What appeared next would reveal the full scope of her work. And for everyone gathered in that ballroom, the surprise of the evening was only beginning. The applause continued as Danica stepped onto the stage, but the atmosphere inside the ballroom had already transformed into something far more powerful than celebration. The room was no longer looking at Preston Mercer, the billionaire investor many had admired all evening. Every eye was focused on the woman they had spent hours underestimating. Danica accepted the award from the Alumni Association president with a gracious smile and a quiet thank you. Then she stepped aside as the master of ceremonies. "Return to the podium. Before our recipient speaks," he said, "we would like to share a brief overview of the extraordinary impact her work has created." The lights dimmed. The large screens behind the stage illuminated once again. What followed felt less like an awards presentation and more like the unveiling of a legacy. Images appeared showing classrooms filled with students from communities across the country. Then came photographs of scholarship recipients celebrating college acceptance letters. Teachers spoke on screen about educational programs that had transformed struggling school districts. Community leaders described mentorship initiatives that reduced dropout rates and expanded opportunities for thousands of young people. The audience watched in complete silence. One statistic after another appeared across the screens. More than 300 scholarship programs funded. Partnerships in dozens of states. Educational resources distributed to millions of students. Leadership academies serving underserved communities. Grants supporting schools that had previously lacked basic resources. Each achievement seemed larger than the last. The room struggled to absorb the scale of it all. Then the video revealed the organization responsible. The Holloway Foundation. Danica's foundation. A foundation she had built quietly over many years without seeking publicity. Gasps spread throughout the ballroom. Former classmates exchanged stunned looks. Many had assumed Danica worked for a community program. Others assumed she volunteered with educational organizations. Almost nobody had imagined she had founded and led one of the most influential educational initiatives in the country. Vanessa sat completely motionless. Every comment she had made throughout the evening now echoed in her memory. The confidence she had displayed earlier disappeared beneath a growing realization. She had mistaken humility for insignificance. She had confused kindness with weakness, and she was not alone. Throughout the ballroom, guests who had dismissed Danica now found themselves confronting their own assumptions. Preston felt something even deeper. As image after image appeared on the screens, he realized how little attention he had paid to the full scope of his wife's accomplishments. He knew she worked tirelessly. He knew she cared deeply about education. But somewhere between business deals, conferences, and financial success, he had stopped asking questions. He had stopped looking closely. The woman beside him had been building a legacy powerful enough to change millions of lives, and he had allowed others to reduce her to a stereotype without saying a word. When the video concluded, the ballroom remained silent for several seconds. Then the audience rose to its feet once again. This standing ovation felt different from the first. It was no longer driven by surprise. It was driven by respect. Genuine respect. Danica stood quietly near the podium as applause filled the room. Her expression remained unchanged. She had not come seeking validation. She had not entered the reunion hoping to impress anyone. Yet the truth now stood where everyone could see it. The woman they had underestimated was not merely successful. She had spent years creating opportunities for people she would never meet. And in a room filled with individuals eager to talk about achievement, Danica's achievements had finally spoken for themselves. The applause continued long after the presentation ended. Many guests remained standing, not because they felt obligated to honor an award recipient, but because they had just witnessed something far greater than professional success. They had witnessed the difference between recognition and significance. As the applause gradually softened, Danica stepped toward the podium. The ballroom settled into complete silence. Hundreds of eyes followed her. Earlier that evening, many of those same people had overlooked her. Some had questioned her accomplishments. Others had quietly measured her worth against visible markers of success. Now they listened with genuine respect. Danica smiled warmly before speaking. "Thank you. This recognition means more to me than I can express." Her voice was calm and sincere, not because of the award itself, but because it represents something larger. Every student who received a scholarship, every teacher who stayed encouraged during difficult years, every family that gained new opportunities, they are the real reason I am standing here tonight. The audience listened carefully. There was no self-congratulation in her words, no desire to impress, only gratitude. "I have learned that the most meaningful work often happens where nobody is paying attention. It happens in classrooms, community centers, libraries, and neighborhoods where people choose to believe in one another. Real success is not measured by how many people know your name. It is measured by how many lives become better because you were here." The room erupted into applause once again. Yet this time the applause carried a different emotion. It was not admiration for wealth or achievement. It was admiration for character. When Danica finished speaking, she accepted the award and stepped away from the podium. Guests immediately gathered around the stage. School administrators congratulated her. Former classmates who had barely spoken to her earlier now introduced themselves again, eager to learn more about her work. Many apologized indirectly through their changed behavior. Their respect had become genuine because it was finally based on truth rather than assumption. Across the ballroom, Vanessa remained unusually quiet. For perhaps the first time all evening, she seemed unsure of what to say. Every judgment she had made now felt small compared to the reality she had witnessed. Eventually she approached Danica. "Congratulations," she said softly. Danica smiled kindly. "Thank you." Nothing more was needed. The moment carried enough honesty on its own. Nearby, Preston stood watching. The pride he felt was mixed with something far more difficult. Regret. He thought back through the evening and remembered every opportunity he had ignored, every assumption he had allowed to continue, every moment when he could have spoken and chose not to. When the crowd finally began thinning, he approached Danica near the ballroom entrance. For several seconds neither spoke. The city lights shimmered through the glass behind them. "I should have been proud of you long before tonight," Preston said quietly. Danica looked at him. There was sadness in her eyes, but also peace. "You always had reasons to be proud," she replied gently. The words lingered between them. Preston understood exactly what she meant. Recognition had not changed who Danica was. The only thing that had changed was that everyone else could finally see it. As the reunion came to an end, guests departed carrying a story.